All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we can all have a seat for our Global Hotspots program we have for you today. Good afternoon and welcome to our Global Hotspots event. The Global Hotspots series is co-sponsored by the Wisconsin Alumni Association, Plato, and the UW-Madison International Division. On behalf of all of the sponsors, thank you for joining us here today. My name is Terry Rayome, and I am a current UW-Madison student, as well as an alumni and donor engagement intern at the Wisconsin Alumni Association. Before I pass the mic over to Cynthia to introduce our speaker for today, I would just like to let you all know our next Global Hotspots event is November 20th, and you can see that in our fall mailer that we have available back out in the entryway. So Cynthia, if you will, please introduce our speaker.
I'm Cynthia Williams from the International Division, and our support of the Global Hotspots series, which brings together faculty, experts, and community leaders for thought-provoking discussions, embodies our commitment to the University of Wisconsin in service to the nation and the world. We couldn't have a better example of this than our speaker today. Calvin DeWitt is the Professor Emeritus of Environmental Studies in the Gaylord Nelson Institute. He's an expert on land stewardship, purchase development rights, local government environmental policy, wetland ecology, environmental stewardship, and faith-based stewardship. He's taught environmental science at the UW-Madison for 4 decades and holds a Chancellor's Distinguished Teaching Award. He recently joined 5 other speakers, including the Vatican's Cardinal Peter Turkson, at a symposium in Milan, Italy, to review responses and applications of Laudato Si, which was released in June 2015. He's given major addresses at more than 100 American universities and colleges and worldwide through travels in China, Korea, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Russia, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic, Mexico. Well, you get the idea of why we thought he would be a good speaker for us today. I want to mention that he has many awards, and I'm not going to take time to go through them all, but I do want to point one out, which is the Friends of the United Nations Special Achievement Award for building an environmental institution. So please join me in welcoming our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you to these 3 units within the university community that sponsored this event. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and I'm rather surprised always that I get to do all these exciting things, because I never try to travel, but people keep inviting me, and I just go. And one of my Amish friends, when he was doing some work alongside of me and his 16-year-old boy who was celebrating his birthday, he said to me, "Cal, don't you ever take a vacation?" And I said to him, "I'm always on vocation." That's, so here I am again on vocation. I've had a wonderful privilege to have my work on environmental stewardship, which has sometimes been not well acknowledged, but I bridge religion and science and climate and all sorts of different fields. It's rare that all these things together are given some sort of response, like either I'm a scientist or I'm maybe a Bible scholar or perhaps a planner. But in the case of the Roman Catholic Church, I was honored in the fall. They didn't know they were honoring me in this, but they invited me to make a presentation. That was at the University of St. Thomas, and then that followed through with another presentation at the St. Paul Seminary, and then finally in Milan, Italy. It's just very pleasing that my work, which is sometimes unappreciated, is appreciated. And it's so nice that you give me this invitation today to relate to you some of my work, my findings, and of course the great great encyclical that has been written by, I believe, a person whom most of us, perhaps all of us, can call our brother, Pope Francis. So my talk is on Laudato Si, which is the title of his encyclical. The subtitle is On Care for a Common Home, and the title of my talk includes the Wisconsin idea and Papa Francesco's invitation to all people on earth to dialogue. Let's see, okay. Laudato Si was published worldwide in a single day. And it was published and addressed to every person on earth, specifically. That's why it's in quotes. And it's impressively comprehensive as a treatise on understanding and caring for the earth system as our common home. It is truly remarkable. It's a first-time event in the history of the world that everyone has been the recipient, if they want to be, of the same document in the very same day, everywhere, in all different languages. This is the way it appears in one of its editions, and of course it has on the front a picture of St. Francis of Assisi, and it is Francesco, Papa Francesco is the way he is called, and St. Francis, the patron saint of ecology, which is what Pope Francis calls him, is the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. This is a quote from Francis in the encyclical. I'll use paragraph marks here so that if you would like to look these things up, you can check them out. There are, all through my talk, I'll have these little paragraph signs. So this comes from a paragraph number 10. He was particularly concerned for God's creation and for the poor and the outcast together. The integral ecology, which is proposed here by Pope Francis, unites what he calls human ecology and natural ecology. It is a unifying, not only a unifying, but an integrating of the ecology of human beings, including their culture, economics, life, with the ecology of the biosphere and of our planet. This great book, this great encyclical, addresses climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the degradation of the oceans, not only in terms of trophic ecology, which would be the structure of ecosystems, but in acidification. It addresses atmospheric pollution and social degradation. It has 246 paragraphs, and these reintegrate what has been fragmented, particularly in American universities, but in universities worldwide, that occurred some 150 years ago, and that is that the various fields of study began to emerge, and they came to take on their own character, sometimes suggesting that there was no unification of our knowledge. So he's put these things back together in this encyclical with tremendous support from agencies within the Vatican that most of us know nothing about. One is the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which includes many Nobel laureates, members of the Royal Society, the National Academy. It includes the Academy of the Social Sciences, the Pontifical Academy, and others. So he's richly supported with expertise. The expertise is outstanding. Integral ecology is the bringing together of human and natural ecology, and there can be no renewal of our relationship with nature, he says in paragraph 118, without a renewal of humanity itself. A powerful statement. There can be no ecology without an adequate anthropology. There are many things like this throughout the encyclical that show this man to be not only compassionate, scientific, ethical, but extremely deep and an absolutely marvelous thinker and doer. In one of these paragraphs, 138, he says, fragmentation of knowledge and the isolation of bits of information can actually become a form of ignorance unless they are integrated into a broader vision of reality. And we've heard the phrase divide and conquer. That's done all the time around us. The first thing you're supposed to see when you see this encyclical is you have to ask the Pope about contraception, right? Because that's far more significant than discussing whether the earth will survive. It's divide and conquer. And so one of the things he's done here is by developing a tremendously broad philosophy, he's pointing to fragmentation of the disciplines within universities, within our culture, as being a root cause of our lack of understanding of the way the world works. Each specialty promotes its isolation and the absolutization of its own field of knowledge. That's very, very typical within our academic world. All of which prevents us from confronting environmental problems effectively. My University of Wisconsin assignment, which began in 1972, was to address the fragmentation of the disciplines. The Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, then called IES, was formed for this particular purpose. Chancellor Edwin Young was troubled by this fragmentation. I know when I arrived there were 18 different departments of biology, for example, but there was not a biology department. This fragmentation had gotten to such, and there were 3 departments of genetics at this campus. Chancellor Young was bothered by all of this and appointed a committee which decided that they would recommend to the chancellor to form an institute around a theme that would pull all the disciplines together. And that's how the Environmental Institute, now called the Nelson Institute, was formed. I was the first and the last faculty member to be appointed to that without department. I was given a tremendously great privilege, which was going to be given to 7 people, but they only were able to do it to 1 because of departmental squabbles that took place. So I was appointed without department, and so I answered to no one but the chancellor, and this troubled a lot of disciplinarians who thought that maybe I might violate the standards within particular disciplines as I'm doing my research. In any case, that was my assignment, and so when I saw the Pope address fragmentation, I was delighted, because that's really what we have to address in our society today. Politicians work on divide and conquer. Institutions of all sorts work on the principle of dividing and conquering. And the big problem is how to put it all back together again. The School of Human Ecology, which we have here, it's over 110 years old now, has in its planning statement of 1994, the Wisconsin idea views the boundaries of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, as the boundaries of the state, and by extension, the boundaries of the biosphere and beyond. In this view, the university consists of the people, the land, and the systems that sustain planetary life. And thus, the university is an institution in which theoretical knowledge intersects with actual practice by people and institutions in the state and around the world. Implementing the Wisconsin idea means informing praxis with knowledge and informing knowledge with praxis. You can look that one up, and you'll discover they're quoting me. And then this great statement on the front of Bascom Hall, which joins with this Wisconsin idea that gives me and every faculty member in this university this fearlessness and continual pursuit of knowledge by which alone the truth can be found. It's a tremendous statement, and it leads to discovery. When the encyclical was produced, all sorts of people, all sorts of institutions, organizations came out with great acclaim for it. One I'd like to highlight here is the Ecological Society of America. It has nearly 10,000 members, scientists, all of them, and it's the biggest ecological society in the world. And it came out with a statement by Jill Barron, David Inouye, and Monica Turner. Monica is a member of our zoology department. These are the past, present, and future presidents of the ESA. The Ecological Society of America commends Pope Francis for his insightful encyclical on the environment, addressed to everyone on this planet. The letter issued on 18 June 2015 is an eloquent plea for responsible Earth stewardship. We hope his leadership will lead to serious dialogue among and action by the world's religious, political, and scientific leaders on the environmental challenges facing this and future generations. There were hundreds and thousands of these commendations that came in all over the world on June 18 and the days following. The National Religious Partnership for the Environment, which is the largest consociation of religious groups in North America, covers Jewish, Roman Catholic, Protestant, mainline, and evangelical, has website links to Laudato Si from the ELCA, the Friends, the Lutheran World Federation, National Council of Churches, and so forth, Interfaith Power and Light, Church World Service, and then my denomination, which is in the lower right-hand corner, which is called the CRC. You've never heard of it, but it's important because that's where I go to church. But the remarkable thing about this particular denomination, which numbers maybe 350,000 people, was the day of the encyclical. One of my colleagues in the main office circulated a memorandum to all of the administrators, and it was entitled, "We're All Catholic and Reformed." And what's also interesting is that just recently a book has come out that whose title is "The Great Reformer," and that is Pope Francis. This is an immense thing that's happening. There are some Catholics I've talked with that say to me, "I'm not sure I can remain Catholic anymore." And there are Protestants I talk to that say, "I think I have to consider being a Catholic." And an Anglican approached the Pope just recently and said, "Should I convert to Catholicism?" And he said, "You're Anglican, why would you do that?" It's quite remarkable. So here is our CEO. His name is Steve Timmermans. And Timmermans and the CRC affirm, this is what he states in his press release, that the gospel must always be proclaimed in word and demonstrated in deed, And a central component of this task includes taking seriously God's command in Genesis 2:15. The reason I'm picking this one up is not because this isn't my denomination, but because Genesis 2:15 is identified as the Pope as the key text. And this man, Steve Timmermans, is calling this God's command. I think it's the first time I've seen this by any major church leader, and it really is the stewardship commission that comes from Genesis 2:15. So I'm going to leave you with three major take-home talking points. One is this particular passage. It's a verse which I'm going to unpack using the Pope. This is what the Pope calls a relation de reciprocidad, a reciprocal relationship. And let me just say that when it was translated into English, Francis wrote this in Spanish, which is his native tongue. It was translated as a mutual relationship, and that's much weaker than the Spanish, which is a reciprocal relationship. Let me describe to you how this works. And first, Francis says that this particular commission, the Stewardship Commission, implies a reciprocal relationship, there's the word, a relationship of mutual responsibility as reciprocal service. And now I'll get into this. One of the exciting things about my work is that since I don't have a department, I can delve into Hebrew too. And if you look, this is Genesis 2:15 kind of exploded, and there are two words at the end, abad and shamar, which we should look at. Abad can also be transliterated avad, A-V-A-D, and there it is, avad and shamar. The Stewardship Commission, avad, is the word that at root means to serve. It's translated to till by the Pope, and it's translated to work in the NIV. Its real meaning is serve. And the second word is shamar, which means to keep or safeguard. So the commission in this particular passage, this particular verse, is to serve the garden and to safeguard it. And what's important to realize here, and this is, the Pope is one of the very few I've seen who sees the depth of this particular command, because what he sees in this reciprocal relationship is that the garden serves us. The verse doesn't have to say anything about that, but we in turn must reciprocate by serving the garden. Now, what is a garden? I usually spell it G-A-U-R-D-E-N, the place you guard. In fact, some of you know from Chicago police cars that on their cars it says to serve and to protect. I think this comes from Jewish police commissioners who are looking at putting this text on every police car. And interestingly, the motto of Chicago is Urbs in Hortus, city in a garden. And these are its gardeners. They serve and protect. They shamar, they avad, and they shamar. So here's where this appears in Joshua. Some of you who know Scripture will know this verse. Choose ye this day whom you shall avad. That is translated there as serve. And then number 624, the Lord bless you and shamar you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Stewardship Commission to avad and shamar from garden to globe this is now a quote from Francis, Pope Francis. Although I put the Spanish in here, this implies this reciprocal relationship, which in the English edition is translated badly, I think, into mutual responsibility between human beings and nature. Each community can take from the bounty of the earth whatever it needs, but it also has the duty to protect the earth and to ensure its fruitfulness for coming generations. The importance of this text will escape some of us because we may not be of Jewish, Islamic, or Christian faith traditions, but this is really powerful stuff when you're dealing with people for whom the scripture here is very authoritative and formative. So there is a button on here that turns everything off. And am I holding? Oh, that's why. That's why I've got this red spot on my hand. He addresses mastery versus stewardship. This is 116. Laudato Si confronts an excessive anthropocentrism handed us as, quote, a Promethean vision of mastery over the world, which gave the impression that the protection of nature was something that only the faint-hearted cared about. For a long time, I've been faint-hearted, at least in the eyes of some. Laudato Si confirms the biblical commission of Genesis 2:15, understood, and this is his quote, understood in the sense of responsible stewardship. So what he's saying is we are responsible stewards, and that stewardship is a reciprocal relationship. And this can be looked at as conservice, conservation, and one of the things I do when I'm in a conservative audience is to say, oh, it's so nice to be with conservatives because you never take without giving back. Because that's what it means, is we always return service to creation in return for service it is given to us. So he amplifies this in the encyclical as a culture of care, paragraph 14. Such caring relationship opens us to awe and wonder, this is from him, speaks of fraternity and beauty, and unites us intimately with all that exists. It sees Earth's climate system as a common good belonging to all and meant for all, a complex system linked to many of the essential conditions for human life. Really, really great. The nice thing about word search is you can just search words, and a lot of reporters have not read the encyclical, but they've searched for words. One of the words it doesn't have in it anywhere is capitalism, even though it's cited as being dealing with that subject. It's interesting it's not there. But from the 246 paragraphs, a culture of care comes out time and time again, and it comes out this way. I eliminated the care for, but this is the way it goes. Care for the vulnerable, care for all that exists, care for creation, care for safeguarding species, care for nature, the environment, neighbor, own lives, a fragile world, the world, indigenous communities and traditions, the land, the interior of homes of the poor, our body, the ecosystem and the entire earth, our brothers and sisters, the natural environment, other living beings, all creatures, ecology, the common good, and the quality of the life for the poor. That's a lot of care, and it just keeps oozing out of this encyclical everywhere. What has happened alongside of this encyclical are others who have realized that the fragmentation of the disciplines is a very serious problem. And so I'm listing here parallel actions that have been directed toward putting things back together. In other words, making an integral ecology emerge from all this variety of disciplines and specialties. The Ecological Society of America not only made this supportive statement, but they launched their stewardship initiative. It's dealt with by Terry Chapin in their new book called Planet Stewardship, or Earth Stewardship. The Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency has developed a scenario for Climate Change, in which they've unified both human and natural ecology, and they have discovered a scenario that meets the 2-degree cap that was set by COP16. Some of you will know about that. The Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, which represents $24 trillion in assets, that's the gross world product is about 77 trillion. So this is an organization that has responsibility and membership for investments that total 24 trillion, and they are supporting this 2-degree cap, which of course is being informed by an ecology that includes not only just economics, but also nature and the biosphere. The papal discussions and talks in the US coming up September 23 and 25 next week. The White House on Wednesday, joint session of Congress on Thursday, and the United Nations on Friday. These are all parallel efforts and actions to bring ecology back together into an integral ecology. I want to give time for discussion. In fact, I was thinking that our discussion here might be the best part of the presentation. So what I'm going to do is get quickly, maybe in the next 10 minutes to the end so that we can have discussions. But I anticipate that we'll be thinking about all the flack that we get whenever we try to do anything right, especially by reductionists who say, yes, but you have to think about my cat, or you haven't considered the fact that I have to do this in my job. Sir John Houghton, who is a very dear friend of mine, and he is also an evangelical. He headed up the IPCC's scientific assessment group for the first 3 reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And he's just written a book, which is his autobiography, called In the Eye of the Storm. I'd suggest you look at it. It would bring you along the same path he has taken as a scientist, as he has confronted all sorts of flack for being a scientist working on climate change. That's why it's called In the Eye of the Storm. Global society is now in transition toward a global culture of care. This transition in many ways has been a stormy one and is described well in Sir John Houghton's The Eye of the Storm. And these are my statements. Society is coming to understand Earth's climate system and has begun working seriously toward restoration of Earth's long-standing atmospheric carbonic temperature regulation. It doesn't sound that way in much of the US, but worldwide this is happening. This transition has made Pope Francis's Laudato Si required reading, and this is a statement I'm making, as the only comprehensive treatise on understanding and caring for the Earth system as our common home. And it's free, and we can all access it. All you have to do is put Laudato Si on your Google, and you'll come up with it. You can download it, and if you don't speak English, you shouldn't be here. But if you know others who are fluent in other languages, it's there in Arabic, French, Italian, Polish, and many other languages. This transition has made Pope Francis's Laudato Si required reading, and its title invites every person on earth to gratefully admire the beneficent arrangement which permits the earth to be clothed with verdure and abundant life. That's a quote from 1900 at the end of a great scientific treatise on the Earth's atmosphere by Frank Washington Very, and that was at a time yet when we had things together. It's interesting, a scientific treaty ending with this gratefully admiring the beneficent arrangement which permits the earth to be clothed with verdure and abundant life. Someday we will come back to be able to say those things. Earth stewardship, as it advances, should broaden the scope of ecology and integrate it with others, other sources of knowledge and understanding, and should stimulate new interactions and collaborations that add to basic research, better guide actions needed to shape a sustainable future. These are the conclusions of Terry Chapin and a whole other group of ecologists, and a paper they published out of the Ecological Society of America in 2011. One of the things we're going to be doing, I think, is we're going to restore Earth's long-standing atmospheric carbonic temperature regulation, which is going to bring us through a tremendous transformation into a decarbonization of our energy economy. And this translation of knowledge and action made by Pope Francis is now one that becomes reading for us. Now, I'm going to conclude mainly with this. I think I have a couple of more slides that I'll put on just for decoration, but this is really important. This is from paragraph 47. We really have to look at this very carefully. It's not being read by anybody because no one's reading this. They just quickly have opinions about it. But look at this. When media and the digital world become omnipresent, their influence can stop people from learning how to live wisely, to think deeply, and to love generously. In this context, the great sages of the past run the risk of going unheard. This is the Pope saying this, but no one's reading this. And what they're saying is, I'm the sage. And I say to them, well, there's sagebrush out there. You ought to join the rest of them. And then the real stinger here, I think, comes from Wendell Berry. And that is the first rule of the criticism of books. You have to read them before you criticize them. It's interesting that many of the critiques of the encyclical came out before the encyclical, and most of them came out on the very same day. And if you've tried to read all 246 paragraphs of this and let it speak to you, you can't finish it in a day. So the Pope himself is saying, watch out. So I remember that it was yesterday, there was an interview on talk radio on NPR about Pope Francis talking about capitalism and as a dung heap. I don't know, you may have seen it, but it's and the Pope never says that, but he does cite Basil of Caesarea in Greece. He said that in the 4th century, before there was capitalism. The 4th century. So we really have to have our crap detectors alerted. Pope Francis will now meet with Obama, our president, Congress, and here's some take-home talking points. You can talk about integral ecology. What is that? What does it mean? What does it mean for your life, your work? You can talk about culture of care. And this one is really important. You can talk about what it means to engage in con-service. Instead of just taking, giving back, These are 4 books I've produced. There are others too, but that I've done for Christian groups primarily. And I have a little note here in case we have a discussion on this decarbonization idea. And I have a new thermostat up here, which is set at 400 parts per million. And it's real interesting that this is the way the thermostat works. And what we're doing each year is moving it up farther and farther and farther. So in order to get things right again, we not only have to hold it where it is, which means producing no carbon dioxide at all into the atmosphere, but we actually have to move it down again. And I didn't want to discuss that one particularly, but there it is. And then here is some of the support base behind the Pope. It's kind of like having a totally cooperative university faculty and one absolutely authoritative chancellor or president, and they're freely giving him of all of their help, but he himself being loving, kind, and thoroughly integrative, taking only what makes sense, and sifting and winnowing fearlessly and continuously by which the truth can be found. Thank you very much. We have questions and answers and discussion, and a roving microphone and some hands going up. This should be really interesting and fun. I hope this continues in your cars on the way back home and over the back fence and with relatives.
Thank you so much. I'm Paula Hirschbeck, and I just want a little clarification on how you read the language, Cal. For example, the phrase coming generations and the climate belongs to all, that beautiful language. Is there an assumption of human exceptionalism? Or when the Pope is speaking, when he says the climate belongs to all, is it all beings?
It was interesting. This came up with one of my meetings with bishops of the Roman Catholic Church. I really wasn't speaking on it, but they were arguing about our exceptionalism. And I finally interrupted. There was a council of about 30 of us around this big table, and I said, we're very exceptional. We're absolutely exceptional. We're the only ones who can destroy the earth. And what that means is that we're also the only ones who can save it. And that's why we're so exceptional. Now you can continue your question.
Is the intent of language like the climate belongs to all, and what was the other one I noted? He speaks about coming generations. Is he speaking about coming human generations? The climate belongs to all humans, or is he including all beings? That's my, you've studied it more thoroughly. So.
Yeah, he is including all beings, and this is very clear as you read the full text. That's another thing that Wendell Berry teaches us, is if you're reading a letter to, let's say you're reading a letter of Apostle Paul to the Corinthians, don't quote just a half a verse because it's a whole letter. And but if you'd like to see how that works, just read a letter from one of your relatives and just pick a verse in it and amplify it. And you can do very, very bad things with it. The versification of the Bible, for example, was only came into existence with the Geneva Bible, which is just a few hundred years ago. Before that, we couldn't refer to chapter and verse. That's why Jesus says, somewhere it is written. And that means it was written in the Bible, but somewhere. So the problem with the dissection that's now taking place on much of the papal encyclical is people are not reading the context. So yeah, he's really, and using Francis, St. Francis, as the patron saint, Pope Francis speaks about talking to the birds. Yeah, he looks at us as creatures, which is really refreshing.
Very radical.
Yeah, and his taking the name Francis is just amazing. You know, no one's ever done that before as a pope. They've never taken the name of Francis, probably for a good reason, because those are faint-hearted people, right? Like me and you. So yeah, so you don't have any fears. You have no reason for fearing there. But you can read you should read the, I think all of us should read the encyclical. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I have read it.
Oh, let's see. We'll wait for a microphone here. There we go.
I have read it as a Roman Catholic and appreciated the holism
Yeah.
and hear him quoting people we were supposed to be excommunicating 35 years ago in terms of, so the change is dramatic in terms
Yeah.
of embracing the ideas of Leonardo Boff and so forth. So I absolutely loved it, and I don't want to pick out a detail. I agree with the value of that. I'd be interested in knowing how what you understood the implications to be for female voice and leadership in the church and in the world. That's half of human, well, really half of all the species, probably. What do you hear in there that's hopeful or encouraging, and what should we be thinking about in terms of equity and equality in that way?
What's hopeful there is George Gagoglio, or however you pronounce his name. He has come along a tremendous path, and the Pope is dealing with what he must deal with at first. And one of the things that's going through a tremendous transition is the membership in the College of Cardinals. It has been strongly dominated by Europeans, and there's a tremendous transition taking place. I think if the press got word of this, they could really make hay of it, because he's dumping people left and right, and firing people who have embezzled funds, and that's not making the news, and I'm happy it isn't. But I don't think he's anti-women at all. In fact, he really has a good understanding of why women are important to the survival of the human race. I mean, they're important not only for their reproductive capacities, but they're very important because most of what Francis is talking about is love. And that there are a lot of women who don't want to think of themselves as being lovable, but they are, and they tend to be more expert and compassionate, it seems, on average. So I think there'll be a woman pope.
Cal, I have another question.
Oh, yes, Jonathan.
Jonathan Patz, one of Cal's strongest admirers in the Nelson Institute, and I also direct the Global Health Institute. And I wanted to ask you, have you seen the traction, how much traction this has really had in the political community and as well as in the religious communities? Are religious leaders really standing up and heralding this and turning to LED lights for their temples, and what sort of traction is this having since it was released, both in the political world and in the religious world?
It's hard to say. It's kind of like you've just left the starting gate, and and asking, you know, where we are. But from all indications, it's almost universally accepted by anyone who's thinking at all. And when you look into it, for example, one of my colleagues is on the Pontifical Academy. His name is Ram. He's the person who discovered the CFCs were these great greenhouse gases. And we spoke together at one of the Catholic meetings lately, and he was very well respected, as I was. And then later I discovered he was a Hindu. And the Roman Catholic Church is putting Hindus, or at least one, into the Pontifical Academy. And the advisor in climate, who accompanied the Pope at the release of the encyclical, was an atheist, is an atheist. Maybe he was an atheist. But it's amazing how open things are, and so I have Jewish colleagues. Larry Troster, for example, who works very much on this particular stewardship commission, who is just absolutely excited about the Pope and how sound he is ethically, and so I think we're really on a good path. In terms of a politician who is Roman Catholic, one has, you know which one, has said, you know, he should let scientists to the scientists. And I thought, well, he hasn't read anything about the Pope either. He didn't get his master's in chemistry, but he taught chemistry, and he's really quite a good scientist. And besides that, if you're someone who has taught chemistry and you have the entire Pontifical Academy of Sciences behind you, do you think he should stick to theology? This has very little to do with theology. To Christians, he's been really very, very sharp. You'll see that right in the encyclical. It says, if you believe that God is creator of heaven and earth, and you destroy his creation, you're not a believer. Now just think about that, and think of how it would affect the very conservative people. They'll say, I am too a believer, you know, I can destroy the earth. It doesn't sound right somehow. And so he's rhetorical too. He lets things unfold in such a way that all of a sudden you find out that you're you. That's important. Yes.
Cal, Michael Dowd.
Mike.
I've spent the last 13 years traveling North America, speaking in all kinds of religious and secular groups. And one of the misunderstandings that I keep coming up against is people think that the evangelicals sort of as a group are behind the curve on this, and yet you and so many others have been really on the forefront. So could you speak just a little bit in terms of what are some of the key individuals and key things happening within the evangelical community specifically on this issue?
Yeah. Well, John Houghton would be probably the prime example. John Houghton, the person who has the book, The Eye of the Storm, he's a Baptist. He preaches in Baptist churches. I worked with him with evangelicals at Oxford. We invited leading world scientists and leading world evangelicals all to come together. And he and I together worked on bringing all these people to see things and to be on the same page together. And I remember when we came to the final declaration, which is called the Oxford Declaration on Climate Change, some of the climate scientists said, but John, we're not Christians, we can't sign this. And he says, you go ahead and sign this, because this is caring for the earth we all love. And they did. The nice thing about an evangelical is they keep preaching, and against all odds, and that's what Houghton has been doing. The most dangerous ones are evangelicals with no education. And Billy Graham and Kenneth Concert are the two people who saw that as a very serious problem. And they founded Christianity Today. They worked to transform Bible colleges into colleges, liberal arts colleges. They worked to introduce science into their curricula, which is now the case pretty much for all the Christian colleges. So there was a problem there, and that problem is really strongly being addressed. I've done a lot of that work myself. I've worked with 60 different evangelical colleges to get them all to develop programs in environmental studies and environmental stewardship. These are evangelical colleges and Pentecostal, Baptists, Reformed, Anabaptists, all sorts of different groups. So there's the really interesting thing about evangelicals is they take the Bible seriously. And as soon as they take the Bible seriously, you can bring them to Romans 1:20, where God's testimony in creation is so clear that everyone's left without excuse to know God's everlasting power and majesty. And what they discover the next is if they begin to destroy creation, they destroy this testimony. So they might be evangelical, but they're destroying the evangelical witness of the creation. That doesn't make sense. So the key for evangelicals over the last 50 years has been education. And that's been very, very important. I still have 3 colleagues who are strict 6-day creationists. They're all PhDs. And I work with them with great compassion. That's what you have to do. Keep loving everybody, even though they're wrong. And what you also discover is, once in a while, everyone in the world is wrong except you. And then you have to begin to look in the mirror.
All right, we have time for one last question.
Oh, thanks, Cal. I'm Alberto Vargas. I'm an alum of the Nelson Institute, and I came here attracted by the mission of the Institute. And now turn the tables around. Now I'm teaching a seminar on sustainability. And the first assignment to the students was to read Laudato Si, so I see a few students here. Something that puzzles me about the discussion is this call for a renewal of humanity, the change in humanity. And the question that I have is, do we have time to do that? What are the implications of this? Or should we be optimistic that we have the technology, that we could do many things with our science, or how concerned we should be for what's there?
Yeah. We don't have time. And yet we have to take the time. So what a dilemma. I think what we all have to do, and if everyone would do that together, renewal would happen within hours. And that is that we all have to be faithful without necessarily trying to be successful. And if we are faithful in pursuing our duty, which is inscribed in stone here on the top of Bascom Hill, let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith dare to do our duty. If we could just make everyone do that, we do have time, because we can turn around on a dime. Now, how would we do this in terms of our carbon economy? Right now, we're investing $250 billion in renewable energy, solar, wind, and so forth, according to the International Energy Institute and this international global investors group I mentioned with their $24 trillion interest, what they estimate is we have to quadruple that. We have to go from $250 billion to $1 trillion annually investment. And that's in a world whose gross domestic product or gross world product is about 77 trillion, maybe 80 trillion. That can be done. And the Netherlands group I mentioned, there are 19 scientists that have done that model, have done the analyses, and they say it's fully feasible that we can do that. Everyone would have to cooperate, but it's feasible. So all of us have to remain very hopeful. Don't throw in the towel, but have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, dare to do our duty. Thank you.